The employment market keeps motoring on, denting chances of a rate cut this year. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese finds himself in the middle of a fight about protectionism, and 3 million people with HECS debt are about to owe much more. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. It is Friday, the 19th of April, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, after the show, you're speaking today with Stephen Halmarick, Chief Economist from Commonwealth Bank.
I sure am. We talk all about yesterday's employment figures, the labour force figures from the Bureau of Statistics. We also talk about what's going to happen to interest rates. Now, Stephen has his hands on probably more data than any other economist in the country, given he's Chief Economist at Commonwealth Bank. So he's got a very good idea about what's going on. And he's of the view that there will be a rate cut this year. That's good news for homeowners, obviously. It's well worth a listen, this one.
Yeah, it certainly is. It's coming up after the show. And a very quick mention, Sean, as well, of our newsletter, which comes out every Wednesday. We mentioned it each day this week. And every time we do, there has been a flurry of sign-ups, people heading to fearandgreed.com.au. A lot of people jumping on, putting your email address in, and it guarantees you will get the newsletter next Wednesday. You don't want to be the only person who doesn't receive it. It's kind of an exclusive club that you can be part of.
I'm with you on that one.
It's actually kind of less exclusive, really, isn't it?
Well, the more people that sign up, definitely.
Yeah, but still, you want to be in it while it's still exclusive. There we go. Maybe that's the hook, Sean. All right, moving on. The main story this morning: the unemployment rate rose to 3.8% last month, still relatively low, demonstrating the resilience in the labour market and providing another reason for the Reserve Bank to delay cutting interest rates.
Employment fell by about 7,000 positions last month, following a jump of 118,000 jobs in February. Full-time positions rose by 28,000, while part-time roles dropped by about 35,000. Michael, the labour market is choppy, to say the least. Even the Bureau of Statistics concedes it's been hard to get good data over the past 6 months or so. The best option is to look at jobs growth over the past 3 months. That's tracking at just over 41,000 per month. Now, that's about what's needed to keep the unemployment rate unchanged, given all the new workers coming into the economy. That, of course, is thanks to those high migration levels. Forward indicators like job vacancy rates and job ads have suggested a slowdown in employment and a higher unemployment rate, but it really hasn't happened yet. I suppose, in summary, the labour market has weakened during the past 18 months or so, but it's stronger than most people, including the Reserve Bank, expected.
All right, I'm going to put this together. If the labour market, Sean, is stronger than expected and more people have jobs, does that add to inflation pressures and thereby delaying interest rate cuts?
Essentially, it does. You sound like an economist, Michael.
Well, I've been practicing. I do it in front of the mirror. I use words words like inflationary pressures and things. Yeah, you really nailed that one.
Expectations, yeah. Well done. Yeah. Well, you're right, because it does. The numbers from yesterday add to the case to keep rates in Australia on hold. When most people have a job, prices are more likely to be bid up. It's actually good news, though. Like, we want people to have a job. But it does restrict what the Reserve Bank can do on interest rates. Inflation is still the main game. And next week, we get quarterly CPI figures. That's for the March quarter. If they continue to fall, then rate cuts might be a chance in the September quarter. Now, by the time the Reserve Bank meets in about September, it will have had the March and the June quarter CPI. So quite possibly there could be a cut then. If we don't see a reduction in inflation in these figures that are coming out next week, then it's unlikely that rates will fall this year.
It's definitely worth a listen to Stephen Halmarick from Commonwealth Bank and his take on all of this, because he does kind of put it really into context, doesn't he, in terms of then what the US is doing as well.
Yeah, he sure does. And he knows a lot more about it than I do. So definitely give Stephen a listen.
And certainly more than I do, despite how much I practice in front of the mirror. How did local markets perform yesterday, Sean?
The S&P ASX 200 closed up 0.5% to 7,642 points, ending several sessions of weakness. Tech stocks led the way, as did the material sector. Healthcare companies tended to underperform. Among the large caps, Rio Tinto ended up 2%, WiseTech Global was 1.6% higher, and Commonwealth Bank, Macquarie Group and National Australia Bank all closed about 1% higher. Goodman Group and Transurban were among the worst performers. In corporate news, annuities and fund manager business Challenger said its profit for the full year is likely to come in at the top end of expectations. That pushed its share price up 5%. It was one of the best on the market yesterday. Interesting one yesterday was ResMed. Its share price dropped to a 6-week low. It was down about 4 or 5%. Basically, Eli Lilly came out in the US and said its weight loss drug Zepbound improves breathing problems in 2 late-stage trials of patients with obstructive sleep apnea. ResMed is all about obstructive sleep apnea. So the fact that these weight reduction drugs seem to be having beneficial effects on sleep apnea sufferers has hurt ResMed. Interesting.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, checking international markets, thanks to Blue Chip Communication, the experts helping financial services companies market, communicate and grow. Visit bluechipcommunication.com.au. What's happening, Sean?
Oil prices have come off a bit, Michael. Brent crude is down to $87 a barrel. Gold's also a touch lower, but iron ore prices rose yesterday. Aussie dollar is up a bit, back about 64.5 US cents. Bitcoin's down to about $61,000 a unit. That, of course, is on the back of US interest rates higher for longer. That theme is very much driving markets.
Okay, we've got a bit to get through. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, there's an old-fashioned fight about protectionism gathering pace in Canberra, with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese saying the government's policies are about de-risking projects to attract private capital.
It's like the 70s and 80s. I mean, not that I can remember the 70s and 80s because it was probably at high school, but, well, 70s I wasn't even only just born. Yes, it's true. It's true.
I love how long it took you to realise how when you were actually born just then. Like, oh dear. And this scramble to make sure that you didn't make yourself sound older than you are. Just this absolute panic that came into your voice.
So true. So true. I mean, I suppose when I've been learning economics, for decades, protectionism is bad. We don't like protectionism. Then COVID came along. We had all the supply chain and logistics issues. Suddenly, like, protectionism was a little bit less bad. It's bad, but not really, really bad, just a bit bad.
Yeah.
Now, there's a growing number of people who reckon that the government is going too far in its Future Made in Australia Pact announced this week. In an interview with the Financial Review, former Productivity Commissioner Gary Banks joined all his successors, including incumbent Danielle Wood, in condemning the government's policies of loans, grants, subsidies and investment incentives as a return to protectionism. Mr. Albanese said Mr. Banks did not understand the policies in full nor appreciate its objectives and likened him to a flat earther. The Prime Minister said the Future Made in Australia scheme is predominantly about loans as well as investment incentives that will be announced in the budget to attract private capital rather than subsidies. He said there is a role for government to get over the bump so companies can begin to produce, and the free market actually isn't enough. You say tomato, I say tomato.
And how about the flat earther line? Seems kind of extreme, doesn't it?
I mean, if you're going to actually throw that at someone, you're going to have to throw it at the government, the flat earther line at the government, because this is actually taking it back to 40 or 50 years ago.
Oh, that's a good point.
Anyway.
All right. Sean, Chinese demand for iron ore may have peaked, according to the Reserve Bank, meaning the excessive bounty for government revenue and mining industry profits might be coming to an end.
Interesting this, the Chinese property sector consumed 296 million tonnes of steel in 2019, but the Reserve Bank expects demand to fall by 80% to just 58 million tonnes by 2050. That's on the back of a shrinking population, and the decline is already happening. A research paper from the bank says slowing overall steel demand in China could weigh on global demand for iron ore and, all else equal, its price. China accounts for 85% of Australia's $136 billion in iron ore exports. They were the figures from last year. Iron ore is the main ingredient in steel making, so a persistent decline in Chinese steel demand will present a significant headwind for the federal and West Australian governments. They reap billions of dollars in royalties and tax revenue. Won't be very good for people like Rio Tinto, BHP or Fortescue either.
Sean, 3 million people with a higher education debt are set to be hit with around 4.5% jump in what they owe on the back of higher inflation.
The figures from the Parliamentary Library yesterday caused Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to say that the government needs to do better among younger Australians. The data commissioned by the Greens show those with higher education loans were likely to face an increase of between 4.2% and 4.8% when the next indexation takes place in June. It follows the highest ever indexation last year of 7.1%. Now, indexation is the annual process whereby the government increases higher education debt to keep it in line with inflation. Obviously, we've had very high inflation. Indexation kicks in, much higher HECS debts. Mr Albanese said the government was considering changes to those rules.
We've actually done an episode, Sean, of our sister podcast, How Do They Afford That?, on HECS debts and helping people to afford student debts because, and it's one of kind of Canna Campbell, who's our co-host on that show, it's one of her real kind of passions is trying to educate people around this indexation, because there is a bit of a misconception that because higher education loans are interest-free, that they're essentially kind of almost free money in a way, but they're not, because they are indexed to inflation. And that means that people are getting these massive, massive hits like they did last year, like they will be getting in kind of June this year. And it's just largely about kind of understanding that and maybe potentially reform to the system further down the track. That's me on my soapbox.
Yeah, that's very impressive. I remember working for an organisation where pensioners were getting income which was levied to inflation, and it was when inflation went backwards. And so the company had to go and get in touch with all the, not pensioners, superannuants, and say, hey, you're actually going to get less money. So it goes both ways. Dreadful process, that one.
Yeah, certainly would be. Now, billionaire pubs owner Bruce Matheson has increased his stake in casino operator Star Entertainment as the inquiry into the group hears more stories of poor governance.
Matheson has upped his stake in the company to 9.59% after increasing it to 8.21% only last month. Mr. Matheson has previously said Star's a wonderful asset, but let's face it, it's also a gamble, pardon the pun, given what's going on at the New South Wales Casino Regulator's inquiry into the group. Yesterday, the inquiry heard that Star fired 7 staff members after they were found to have falsified welfare checks on hardened gamblers at its casinos. Also yesterday, a consultant to Star, Dr. Attractor Lagan, said former Star Entertainment Chief Executive Robbie Cook saved Star from going out of business by undertaking the work around capital raisings, but it came at the cost of the cultural reform program.
Sean, veteran 7 Network CEO James Warburton will step down immediately following a board meeting yesterday, bringing forward his departure date from the company.
Yeah, that's right. He was supposed to go at the end of this financial year, but obviously Seven has had a bit of strife in recent weeks. His resignation is effective as of yesterday. Now, there's been a bunch of scandals, including an expenses investigation by the Sydney Morning Herald, a former Spotlight producer claiming the network paid for drugs, sex workers and more to secure an interview with Bruce Lerman. So it has been lots of turmoil at the company. Current Chief Financial Officer Jeff Howard has been appointed as the incoming Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer. He'll start in his new role today. Kerry Stokes, the Chair of Seven West Media, thanked Warburton for his contribution to the business. He is quite a doyen of the industry, and the fact that he's leaving early is definitely big news, Michael.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, a hot summer and outages triggered by severe storms pushed wholesale electricity prices higher in the first 3 months of the year. But the good news, Sean, is that there could be some relief next year.
Yes, high temperatures and humidity during the 3 months increased demand, 3 months to the end of March, and a severe storm in Victoria sparked outages as congestion in the national grid stopped states sharing supply. The Australian Energy Regulator yesterday said average quarterly electricity prices in Queensland and Victoria increased by 20% and 9% respectively from a year earlier. Now, this last summer was Australia's third warmest on record, bringing higher demand for cooling, particularly in Queensland, where daily demand exceeded previous records on 3 occasions during the quarter. Now, according to IAP, government price caps on coal and price did help to stabilise prices in recent quarters. That was a quote from AER board member Jared Ball.
BHP has downgraded production volumes for its Queensland coal division and won't clarify what's happening to its troubled nickel business until August.
Very serious. But do you want another interesting fact from the Big Australians quarterly report yesterday?
Oh, I live for interesting facts, Sean.
Yeah, it costs BHP almost 7 times more to produce a tonne of coal in Queensland than it costs to produce a tonne of iron ore in Western Australia.
Really?
Isn't it amazing? Obviously different processes and that, but 7 times.
That is extraordinary.
Another interesting, so BHP actually produced 68.1 million tonnes of ore in Western Australia in the Pilbara region during the March quarter, 68.1 million. Interestingly, it sold 69.7 million. There you go. How do you do that? Well, you've got a stockpile somewhere, presumably. So you've just been selling it off. Anyway, BHP received an average price of $106.30 a tonne. That's US dollars. The quarterly update yesterday didn't provide any detail to the 3,000 workers employed by its WA nickel division. It's facing possible closure amid weak nickel prices. BHP said it will provide workers with clarity by August. The company's share price closed up 1% yesterday.
And Santos said revenue in the March quarter was down 15% due to bad weather, maintenance and lower gas prices.
It also said its long-awaited carbon capture storage project is 84% complete, and the first batch of carbon will be injected later this year. I think this is very kind of interesting. If it works, it could trigger final investment decisions on a bunch of gas projects out there, because if it can actually reduce carbon from the air, it kind of gives it more ability to spend money on gas.
84%, that is very specific. I enjoy that. Turning to international news, US President Joe Biden called China xenophobic while highlighting the Asian nation's economic woes and pushed for major new tariffs on Chinese steel.
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago, President Biden held a phone call with his counterpart Xi Jinping. The sense was sort of things were stabilising. But manufacturing, particularly blue-collar job losses in the US in an election year, is causing quite a bit of friction. According to Bloomberg, Mr. Biden said, and I quote, "They've got a population that is more people in retirement than working. They're not importing anything. They're xenophobic. Nobody else coming in. They've got real problems." End quote. The president also calls for higher tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminium, part of a series of steps to shore up the American steel sector. China's Commerce Ministry came back and said the US, well, full of false accusations and based on the need of domestic politics. Not sure about the first part, but I'm pretty confident in the second part's right.
Yeah, I suspect you might be right. Now, Sean, this last one is really quite incredible. The pictures are just amazing. Massive amounts of rain in the United Arab Emirates has swamped the desert nation and disrupted flights at the world's busiest airport for international traffic.
Have you seen the pictures?
Yes, it is just like the volume of water and the planes going through it.
Yeah.
It's just like they look like kind of Catalina flying boats, like, you know, that
just really big ones.
Yeah. God, we're worried about kind of you making yourself sound old before, and here I am talking about those Catalinas. Goodness me. Sorry, please go on.
Well, the rain in the UAE on Tuesday was greater than anything documented since the start of data collections in 1949. On average, Dubai Airport receives 95 millimetres of rain a year. Doesn't sound like a lot to us, but, you know, that's what it does, 99 millimetres a year. On that one day, 142 mils fell. Heavy rain also fell in Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. The flooding sparked all this speculation that maybe it's about cloud seeding, flying small planes through clouds, dispersing chemicals aimed at getting rain to fall. Maybe that caused the deluge, according to Associated Press. Experts said the storm systems that produced the rain were forecast well in advance and that cloud seeding would not have caused such flooding. However, it didn't stop the speculation because cloud seeding is not universally liked. Anyway, the UAE, which heavily relies on energy-hungry desalination plants to provide water, conducts cloud seeding in part to increase its dwindling limited groundwater.
It is an amazing story, and check out those images if you can, because it is quite amazing to see. Up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Your guest today, Stephen Halmarick, Chief Economist from Commonwealth Bank.
Yeah, all about yesterday's labour market figures, what's going to happen next week with the Consumer Price Index data released, and what all that means for interest rates.
Yeah, it's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Friday, the 19th of April, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.